going on, everyone? My name is Jemiah McKinney, or you can just call me Juice because that's my nickname. On today's show, I have a heavy hitter for you guys today. I am joined by football analyst, football genius in my eyes, Brett Kollmann. Now, I think that a lot of you guys know who Brett Kollmann already is. If you don't know who Brett Kollmann is, I will have him kind of introduce himself to you guys, during the show. He'll tell you a little bit about his YouTube channel, his podcast. I really respect Brett Kollmann a lot. He knows a ton about football. I learn a lot about football every time I watch one of his episodes on YouTube or listen to his podcast, the Bootleg Football Podcast. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Joe Burrow, Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts, Jordan Love. We're going to dive into all the big-time quarterbacks that were taken in the 2020 NFL Draft and how they will project. We're also going to talk about the 2019 quarterbacks that were drafted. Dwayne Haskins, Daniel Jones, Kyler Murray. We'll talk about their teams and how they're going to project. We'll also dive into some Houston Texans football because Brett Kollmann is a Houston Texans fan. So I want to get his perspective on how he feels about Deshaun Watson. Is Deshaun Watson really truly an elite quarterback? How good of a coach is Bill O'Brien? Should he have already been fired? We'll talk about that. We also will discuss the most underrated quarterback in football in this full episode. We'll also dive into a bunch of other things, football related. And we'll just talk about Brett Kollmann, the person, as he's worked at the NFL Network. So I really want to get some insight about that experience that he had right there. I'm not going to waste your time much longer, I should say. In this episode, I bring to you a good friend of mine and a person I have a lot of respect for. His name is Brett Kollmann. Hope you guys enjoy. Brett Kollmann, officially in the building, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
Good, man. I appreciate you for coming on the show, man. I really do appreciate it. I know you're really busy. You probably have a lot, things that you're working on right now, but I appreciate you for coming through. Just tell the people a little bit about your platform, your YouTube channel, your Bootleg Football Podcast, and we'll get started, man.
Yeah, it started, when I was at NFL Network, it kind of started as like a proof of concept for my producers to kind of have long-form X's and O's analytical content where, it's more than just breaking down a few plays, it's breaking down 15 to 20 minutes worth of plays and kind of going really, really deep into it. And eventually it just kind of turned into its own thing. And without me really putting that much effort into it, I wasn't planning on going full time with it, but it grew into like 11,000 subscribers. People really loved it. I was only putting out like one show every few months, and then eventually got to the point where my wife was like, you know what, you're not even trying and it's growing, so what happens if you actually try? And so I left NFL Network, kind of strike out on my own, and I put out one show a week now, and it's gone from 11,000 subscribers to almost 250,000 in about 3 years, and I can't believe the overwhelmingly positive response it's gotten, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next 3 years.
Let's talk some quarterbacks. 2020 NFL quarterbacks that got drafted. I want to kind of get your thoughts on Joe Burrow. The more and more I think and watch Joe Burrow, I just feel even more and more good about him as a player. And as far as the Bengals' future goes, Joe Burrow, I didn't understand the pushback of people saying, oh, he's a product of Joe Brady. When Joe Brady goes out there and throws the touchdown passes versus Auburn versus Florida, then come talk to me. I don't think that Joe Burrow is a product of Joe Brady. A lot of people said that he only did it for about 1 year in college, and that's fair. I understand that, but it was the greatest season in college football history, in my opinion. I mean, this guy, you can put up a lot of great numbers in college and not translate well to the NFL. This guy has NFL habits. He's deadly accurate, excellent decision maker. He can fit the ball into tight windows. He has great anticipation skills, excellent football IQ. I don't think he gets enough credit for his football IQ. I know people talk about, him not having an elite arm as far as, arm strength, not a Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers as far as the arm goes, but man, I mean, he's just so much ahead of the players he was so much ahead of the players on that field as far as his brain on the football field. I mean, I looked at some of those games. I couldn't find hardly any mistakes. I mean, he was virtually perfect in some games, in my opinion. And he did it in the SEC versus the elite defenses. He did it in the national championship versus Clemson. And Joe Burrow has to go out there and execute those plays. So I don't understand the whole pushback about he only did it for 1 year. And I think that he's really going to jumpstart the Bengals franchise. I really do. I felt that he was the best quarterback in the draft. I just felt that he was above Tua, above Jordan Love. Talk about how you feel about Joe Burrow as a player, how he's going to translate to the NFL. What did you see on film?
Yeah, and he's so good before the snap, but really what impresses me the most about him, and this is kind of what I've grown to gravitate towards in the last few years, is it's not necessarily how good a quarterback is when everything's on schedule and protection's great and receivers are getting open like that. I don't really care much about, because a lot of quarterbacks can make great throws under perfect circumstances. But what makes Burrow special is that when things break down, he's even better. He's the only quarterback in this draft class whose passer rating actually went up under pressure, and they were both north of 130 or 140, which is utterly insane. But to have a quarterback whose passer rating is I think it was 134 if I remember correctly, under pressure is unprecedented. And he doesn't get phased. When the pocket breaks down, he finds space, he rolls out. It's very Russell Wilson, Pat Mahomes-ish, where even if they just kind of have to create something out of nothing, they can do it. His eyes are always looking deep down the field. He's deadly accurate on the move. I mean, it is a extremely hard combination to stop, because even when you win, he can make you lose. And I think he's going to be a special player in Cincy.
Yeah, I totally agree. He does make a lot of great plays off schedule. And we talk about, quarterbacks. Mobility is kind of at a premium these days. I still think there's a place for the Tom Brady's, the Drew Brees of the world, but you better be pretty perfect from that pocket. And I think the offensive lines have kind of deteriorated over the last couple of years, with more 7-on-7s. Offensive linemen are not as developed, I would say. So mobility is definitely something that I kind of want in a quarterback. And I'm not saying Joe Burrow's, Deshaun Watson or Lamar Jackson, but he definitely has some mobility. He's great off schedule. And like you said, under pressure, he's great. So I'm all in on Joe Burrow. Now, as far as the team he goes to, I think the Bengals actually should be excited about their team going forward. I understand that they haven't won a playoff game in forever. I forget the date. It's at least over 20 years, I believe. I understand that Mike Brown at times has kind of made some questionable decisions. I don't like the fact that they don't have a true general manager. I think that sometimes he gets in the way of things. But I got to tell you, man, there's just certain quarterbacks that jumpstart your franchise. We look back on Eli Manning. He wasn't the most talented guy, but he won the Giants 2 Super Bowls. He was the number 1 overall pick. Peyton Manning was the number 1 overall pick, and he changed the Colts, okay? Cam Newton got the Panthers to a Super Bowl. I think that Kyler Murray is the number 1 overall pick and do some special things with the Cardinals. There's just certain quarterbacks that jumpstart a franchise. And I think that Mike Brown is kind of finally starting to get out the way. They went out and spent some money in free agency. They spent some of the most money in free agency. Actually, I think the third most money. Cincinnati's been one of those teams that has, in the past, been not as reluctant to go out and spend money on free agency. So I'm happy about that. I really like their draft. And I'm going to be honest with you, Brett. This might be a hot take, but I think in about 10, 15 years, the Bengals are going to win their first Super Bowl with Joe Burrow. I know it's a tough division with Baltimore. Pittsburgh's well-run. Cleveland's well-run. But I just think that Joe Burrow will find a way to win a Super Bowl eventually with the Bengals. I like the direction their team is going in. He's got weapons, And Mike Brown put together a pretty darn good football team when Andy Dalton was there. I know Andy Dalton was the best in the playoffs, but I just thought to myself, if Aaron Rodgers was on the Bengals a couple years ago, if Russell Wilson had A.J. Green, all those great wide receivers to throw to. The Bengals had a great defense, always had a good running game, when Marvin Lewis and Andy Dalton were at their best, They actually assembled a very good roster. I felt that a couple years ago was a top 5 roster in football. And I just didn't believe in the Bengals because I didn't believe in their quarterback. Now, we have to see if Zach Taylor is the coach of the future, but man, I just think that Joe Burrow is going to change that team. Talk about maybe some players they brought in as far as the draft goes, kind of the state of the Bengals right now. And do you think Bengals fans should be excited? Can Joe Burrow turn them around?
They certainly have a window, and kind of the ideal window to win a Super Bowl is when your quarterback is in the first 5 to 6 years of his career, especially if he's a first-round pick, because you get contract control. You get 4 years plus a 5th-year option plus a potential franchise in year 6. So their window starts right now. We saw the Seahawks capitalize on it when Wilson was on his rookie deal. We just saw the Chiefs capitalize on it. That's just kind of what teams do now is they find a young quarterback they like that's dirt cheap, and then they load up in free agency around him, which is what the Bengals did. And I also think they had a pretty good draft class around him too. So if they were going to win a Super Bowl, it's probably within the next half decade. They got to get by Kansas City. They got to get by Baltimore. They got to get by, honestly, their whole division. I think it's maybe the best division in the AFC, either them or the West. Denver is a great team. The Chargers are still stacked. It kind of depends on what Justin Herbert does, but there's a lot of competition for them. But they have to spend money around Burrow and capitalize on the fact that his contract is so cheap. If they do the typical Bengals thing and they don't go out and spend and surround him with talent, it's going to be a wasted window, and they're not going to win anything. They'll probably make the playoffs. They might even go deep in the playoffs, but they really have to go balls to the wall these next 5 years.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, and it's kind of ideal nowadays to, get that quarterback, to that big game on the rookie contract, so we shall see. Now, I was really sold on Joe Burrow. One player that I think we kind of agree on is I just don't see it with Justin Herbert, man. Now, I will give him the benefit of the doubt. I think there are some tools to work with. He's got the strong arm. He's mobile enough in the NFL today where quarterbacks kind of have to be mobile. The statue in the pocket, the Phillip Rivers, of the world. They're just not gonna fully prosper, in my opinion, these days anymore. So Herbert has the tools, but I've compared Justin Herbert to a McDonald's burger in the past. When you watch a McDonald's commercial, the burger looks juicy, it looks tasty on the screen, and then when you buy it, it's fine, but sometimes it disappoints you. And look, I think that the Chargers have a very good roster, and the ideal situation is hopefully Justin Herbert sits for a little bit behind Tyrod Taylor, hopefully he learns, and I'm going to be honest with you, he has a lot of good players around him, so he could prove me wrong, but I got to see it to believe it, Brett. I really do. I don't know if he'll fully flame out with the Chargers just because they have a lot of talent around him. Very good wide receivers. They have an improved offensive line. Very good running backs. But he's late on a lot of throws. Doesn't anticipate very well. He struggles to read defenses. At times, he's wildly inaccurate. He's just not a natural at the position, in my opinion. He's very robotic in my eyes, And, I can understand why a team would go all in on someone like Patrick Mahomes or Jordan Love, who had turnovers in college, because I see their natural ability to play the position. Herbert, I just don't see it. I think that he gets a lot of credit for the way he looks and for his potential, but we have to look at what's on the film. And he played 4 years at Oregon, and I just did not see the progression that I want to see from him. And I'm just not sold on Justin Herbert. And I don't think you are sold on Justin Herbert too much. So kind of talk about the situation he's going into. I do think that he's in a position to succeed if he's about that life, but I don't know, man. I just think that the Chargers are going to be eventually disappointed, especially in a division with Drew Lock and Patrick Mahomes. We'll see what the Raiders do at quarterback, but either way, I think the Chargers are going to be the third best team for the next couple years, simply because I don't think that Justin Herbert's going to cut it. What do you think?
Yeah, and the thing with Herbert is when you look at what he was surrounded by in Oregon, were his receivers great? Not really, at least for the first half of the season. They were dealing with some injury issues, but what's even more important than that is the offensive line. And he had the best offensive line in all of college football. That was a NFL offensive line in front of him. At least 4 of them will probably end up as starters at some point in their career, which is pretty insane for a single college team. And so you would think, okay, if he has perfect pockets the majority of the time, keep in mind his left tackle next year is probably the best player in next year's draft, and that's saying a lot. Penei Sewell, keep an eye on him. He's going to be a top 3 to 5 pick, guarantee it. So even with those perfect pockets, you would expect him to just absolutely shred people when he can just stand in there and fire. But he had a missed accuracy percentage. Like, he was missing throws to open receivers 20% of the time, which is insanely high. Like, guys were wide open and he flat out missed. Like, that is an extremely high rate. His actual completion percentage was, I think, in the mid to high 60s, which sounds good, but when you factor in that he threw screens at nearly 25% rate, which is absurd. Like, even Kyler Murray, who as an NFL quarterback threw it at about 18%, which was the highest ever recorded, he still far exceeded Kyler Murray's rate, and that's saying something. And so, if you're throwing screens that much and your overall completion percentage is like still below 70, like that's a major concern for me. And then you look at the tape and just his actual decision-making process. Like, he's slow to process sometimes. Like, he'll stick on his first read to the point where his second read, it isn't open by the time he finally moves to it. Or sometimes he'll stick on the first read so long that even when the window was there, he'll throw it late and then it's not open. There are some wow throws here and there, but I think people pay so much attention to the 3 great throws a game that they ignore the 7 bad throws a game. And I don't see it. I think he's probably a couple of years away from maybe being ready to start. But even then, he started for 4 years in college and didn't really get much better despite having an all-American type offensive line. So I don't necessarily expect him to start magically progressing in the NFL either. So, I don't know. I wasn't a huge fan of the pick. I didn't have a first-round grade on him. If the Chargers were going to take anybody after missing out on Tua, I would have just waited till the early second round and taken Jalen Hurts. And I honestly think Hurts is a better quarterback, and I think their franchise would be in a better spot if they use that pick on somebody else and then grab Jalen later.
Yeah, I thought they would potentially go out and get Cam Newton. I think they gave Cam Newton a look for whatever reason. They just didn't, pull that through. And I thought that Jordan Love was a pretty good pick if they were going to go quarterback. So, yeah, I'm not too sold on Justin Herbert, but we shall see. I think that he's in a pretty good situation as far as his roster goes, but only time will tell. Now, I want to get to Jordan Love a little bit. Personally, for me, like I mentioned earlier, I thought that Joe Burrow was head and shoulders the best quarterback in that draft class. Nothing much to talk about there. But I said that even over Tua Tagovailoa, I would probably draft Jordan Love. And I know that Tua's probably, if he's healthy, probably more ready to start right away than Jordan Love, but I'm all about your potential, And I know I talked about with Herbert, the lack of floor, I should say, but I just see a guy that's a great natural thrower of the football. He has the arm talent. He's mobile enough to make plays off schedule. Like I said, he's just a natural at that position. He makes some throws that some NFL quarterbacks can't even dream of making, in my opinion. And as a Packers fan, I was kind of disappointed in the direction our team is going in. Not getting Aaron Rodgers, a wide receiver, not going after Patrick Queen to improve the run defense. But, I think that Jordan Love's gonna hit. I really do. He's gonna sit behind Aaron Rodgers. The main issues I had with him is that he didn't get off his first and second reads very well. At times, poor decision making. If you sit behind Aaron Rodgers and learn, I think that you're gonna get better at those things. I think the Packers are a pretty darn good organization. So, talk about Jordan Love and where you had him ranked among the quarterbacks this year. And do you think that he's in a pretty darn good situation in Green Bay? And what are Packers fans getting if Jordan Love really hits?
Yeah, I had him as QB4 in this class behind Jalen Hurts. I also thought he was a second-round pick. We love the athleticism. We love the arm talent. As a decision-maker, he's better than Justin Herbert, but still, I think, not as good as Tua, not as good as Burrow. Probably about the same. I think he and Jalen can have some of the same issues in terms of decision-making at times, but I still think Jalen's more consistent, and he's certainly more accurate. My main problem with Jordan is, for whatever reason, fades he really, really struggles with in terms of layering the ball in outside the numbers, down the boundary. And just kind of throwing fades has always been a huge issue with Jordan Love in terms of placement and timing and everything like that. And that's a throw that you have to be able to make at the NFL level. And for the last 2 years, he's really struggled with it. He can hit everything else. It's just fades in particular and go routes that he just really struggles with down the field, outside the numbers. And so I think that's something he's going to have to work on the next couple of years while he's sitting behind Aaron. That is the main reason why I don't think he's ready to play right now, is because that's a throw you have to have in your arsenal, especially in this offense where they like to run slot fades to Adams so much. Like, you have to be able to do that. And he's just not ready. So, again, in terms of everything else, yeah, I like him. But until he fixes that one throw that he hasn't been able to make the last couple of years, he's not ready to go.
Gotcha. I do think that Jordan Love is not quite ready to play right now. I said that he needs to sit for about a year or two, so I do agree with you there. And hopefully he's the next great quarterback in Green Bay because, man, Brett, I got to tell you, I know that you've been through a lot as far as being a Houston Texans fan the last month or so, but, man, I want to get your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers really quickly. Obviously, the Packers go 13-3, go to the NFC title game. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is quite the best quarterback in football anymore. I still think that he's an elite quarterback, and I think that Mahomes and Russell Wilson are the two quarterbacks that are just playing above everyone else. Then you get to battle it out with, Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, Drew Brees, and even Tom Brady. I still think Tom Brady is still a pretty darn good quarterback. His football brain IQ is very good, but I think that Aaron Rodgers still has to be somewhere in your top 5. But the last couple of years, the Packers' offense has kind of stalled a little bit, and he had to deal with the whole Mike McCarthy issues. I think that Matt LaFleur was still adjusting as a first-year head coach. I don't think his second-half adjustments were quite that good. But, Aaron Rodgers, 4,000 yards, 26 touchdown passes, 4 interceptions, that's still pretty darn good. And that's considered an off year for Aaron Rodgers. What do you see as far as Aaron Rodgers on film? Is he still an elite quarterback? What has been going on with the Packers offense the last couple of years? We talk about how they have Devontae Adams, but who else? Alan Lazard. They had Geronimo Allison. Marcos Valdes-Scantling didn't quite, play up to par this year. So kind of talk about where Aaron Rodgers is right now as far as a quarterback goes. Because honestly, I got to be honest with you, Brett. I want to go all in. I want my team to win a Super Bowl. I would much rather win a Super Bowl and maybe miss the playoffs a couple years rather than being just relevant and then having nothing to show for it. I just really wish that the Packers would have went all in and got Denzel Mims, maybe got a Patrick Queen, but they're moving towards the future. So kind of talk about the state of the Packers and how Packers fans should feel as far as Aaron Rodgers goes right now.
I don't really have any concerns about Aaron personally. We can say it was a down year, I guess. Really, I would just say I wish he was a little bit more aggressive. I feel like he was a little bit more conservative than we're used to seeing. But in terms of accuracy and everything like that, I didn't really think he was regressing physically. I just kind of want to see that aggression that we know and love from Aaron, especially when he's out of the pocket, come back. And maybe it was a little bit of discomfort with a new system and all that kind of stuff. Maybe a lack of trust in his receivers like he used to have with, Jordy and James Jones and all those guys. It's a different crew. And maybe if he had a little bit more trust in people not named Devontae Adams, we would see that aggression. But in that kind of harkens back to everybody being so upset they didn't take more receivers in the draft. Here's the thing, though. This draft was clearly Matt LaFleur trying to emulate his teacher, Kyle Shanahan. When we look at what kept the Packers out of the Super Bowl, it wasn't necessarily Aaron having a problem, not necessarily the receivers having a problem. It's an easy scapegoat to have, sure, because they fell so far behind, but look at how they fell so far behind. They got absolutely demolished in the run game. Jimmy G over in San Francisco really had to throw barely any passes for the last 2 games leading up to the Super Bowl because their run game was so dominant. They ate clock. They kept the defense fresh. They beat the Packers into submission twice that year. And those were the 2 most embarrassing losses they had all year. It was getting beaten into submission with the run game. So look at what they did. They took A.J. Dillon, who compares semi-favorably to Derrick Henry, same kind of build, similar kind of play style, not quite as slashing, but a little bit more of a power back than Henry. Or when I say power back, I mean capable of running in power runs, whereas Henry's a little bit more of a zone guy. So they took him, who Matt LaFleur just watched Derrick Henry, a former player under him in Tennessee when he was in Tennessee. They just watched him carry the Titans to the AFC Championship. So okay, let's go get that kind of guy. They took Josiah DeGuara, who was a tight end / kind of fullback, H-back type player who they're going to move all over the place and be their Kyle Juszczyk, who is a huge factor for, I'll say it again, the San Francisco 49er. They want to run the ball with A.J. Dillon. They want to run the ball with Aaron Jones. They want to get DeGuara involved both as a blocker and as a receiver in a Kyle Juszczyk type role. They have a quarterback sitting behind Aaron who they like, who they can develop, who they know is not ready to play yet. They're not emphasizing wide receiver in those first 3 picks because they didn't feel like they needed one. Because what do the Niners have at receiver? Emmanuel Sanders as their number 1. Like, they didn't have Devontae Adams in San Francisco, and they still rolled the Packers on the way to the Super Bowl. So they don't consider that position to be ultra important to get to that promised land. When they're seeing other teams do it without great receivers. So they're building to emulate the Niners. They're not building to piss off Aaron Rodgers. And maybe Rodgers was mad because Rodgers is used to having a ton of wide receivers, but this is the reality of what they're doing now. This is what the offense is. It doesn't prioritize the wide receiver position. It prioritizes the backfield. And he's going to have to get used to that. And if he does get used to that, guess what? They can probably go to the Super Bowl because the Niners just did the same thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that if the Packers get a top 5 run game this year, and let's be real, Aaron Rodgers had to carry the team for a long time. He really has. So what are they doing now? They're running the ball more. They don't rely on Aaron Rodgers as much. People talk about his lack of touchdowns this year. I will point to a philosophy change in the Packers. So I 100% agree with you. I said in my episodes that they are trying to become the 49ers and build their team kind of like that. Kyle Shanahan back in Tennessee and back with the Rams had a lot of 2 tight end sets. I like Jay Sternberger. I think that DeGuara, I don't think that he's necessarily an explosive player, but I do think there's versatility there. He has pretty good hands, so I think that he can get open a little bit. And, A.J. Dillon's a bruiser. I think my Packers are going to really love that pick in the cold weather in home games, hopefully, late in the season. And, again, if they can become a top 5 run game and Aaron Rodgers and the defense plays better than they play versus the 49ers, then that's a pretty darn good football team. I think that they're still the class of the NFC North. Kind of talk about the Packers draft because, let me actually shift to this. What was more the Packers' problem as far as their run defense last year? Because, honestly, you had a great quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, had a great run game in Aaron Jones. Devontae Adams is great. The one weakness of the team last year was their run defense and getting bullied by physical teams, the Chargers and the 49ers. So, was it a schematic issue? They brought in Christian Kirksey this year, to hopefully be an upgrade over Blake Martinez. Kollmann Martin is the guy that they drafted out of Minnesota. So how can Green Bay improve on their run defense? Do they need better players? Is it a schematic issue? Kind of talk about the holes as far as the middle of their defense. And are the Packers getting better at those things, with their new philosophy?
It really was a problem with the second level. Kenny Clark is a beast in the middle. Preston Smith and Cedarius Smith both set really nice edges outside. But, if you're occupying all of them with blocks and then saying, okay, we're going to rely on Blake Martinez to get in the right spot at the right time and make a good tackle. I understand that Martinez has a ton of tackles, but when they're all 6 to 7 yards down the field, who cares?
Thank you. I agree.
Never mind the fact that he wasn't great in coverage either. So, you bring in a guy like Kirksey, you draft a guy like Kollmann Martin, guys who can just get in the fit. And by in the fit, I mean in the run fit. Be in the right spot, attack blocks with the right leverage, help out your defensive linemen. Just do your job. That's all they need. Blake Martinez, if he is doing his job and having those 100-plus tackles actually matter, then he would still be in Green Bay, I guarantee you, because that was kind of their one weakness. So I understand he's a good fantasy player in IDP leagues, but in terms of real football, those tackles were not effective.
Yeah, I totally agree with you right there. So I want to kind of shift to Tua Tagovailoa, and I'm going to talk about Jalen Hurts a little bit. So Tua goes to Miami. I think that he's in a great position to succeed. I really like what Brian Flores is doing down there in Miami. I felt that they overachieved this year. I felt they had a pretty solid draft. Tua, he's very accurate, very good football IQ in my opinion. My one issue with Tua, though, however, is that I think that he thinks he's more mobile than he actually is. I think that he's much better suited just staying in the pocket and delivering those darts and picking you apart underneath in the intermediate and short game. I think that he has a pretty solid deep ball, but he's not like Mahomes. He's not like Aaron Rodgers. I don't want him bombing the ball consistently down the field. That's just not the type of quarterback he is. I think the Miami Dolphins realize that. And you talked about in your episode about Tua Tagovailoa when you covered him is that you think that Tua Tagovailoa is a system quarterback. And I kind of totally agree with you. So kind of talk about what you mean by a system quarterback and where you think Tua fits in as far as what the Dolphins are trying to do. And kind of talk about just what you think of him as a player. You know, my other knock is that, you know, not this year, but last year, he kind of got pushed around a little bit by Mississippi State, by Georgia. He didn't have the best game versus Clemson. And he had a lot of talent around him. You know, he had Jerry Jeudy. He had Henry Ruggs. He had a very good offensive line, very good running back. So I just wanted to see him perform a little bit better versus some of the more elite defenses. But again, I think that he's very talented. I think that he's going to work in the NFL if he stays healthy, and the Dolphins surround him with very good players. So kind of talk about where you fall on Tua.
Yeah, you know, you kind of hit the nail on the head. He is a system quarterback. And when I say system quarterback, that's not an insult like a lot of people believe. It just means that, you know, he is the kind of guy that in a certain system, he will excel. And his skill set excels in a system that is very much like the one Champ Gailey runs, where you're spreading people out, you're getting the ball out quick. You know, everything's kind of working 10 yards and under from the line of scrimmage, and then if you are going to take a shot, again, it's something like a fade or a go ball where you're getting the ball out really quick, because on those kind of throws, even though you are attacking deep, you're not kind of like, you know, taking the 7-step drop and waiting for stuff to come open. It's 3 steps, set, fire. And so that's really what he is best at, and that's what Shane Gailey likes to prioritize. So it is a match made in heaven system-wise. And that's why I think that he's going to be productive in Miami as a system quarterback, because he is in a system that suits what he does. Again, that is not an insult. That's just realistic. You know, he's not an athlete that you want to, like the system the Ravens run. You know, he wouldn't be successful there because he's not the right kind of athlete. He's not the kind of athlete that works in a Bruce Arians type system either, because he doesn't have that great of an arm where, you know, we're taking those 7-step drops and we're hanging in there and we're firing darts, you know, deep down the field in tight windows. Like that's not what he is. So I think it's a really great fit in Miami. I think they brought in Shane Gailey for a reason, because they knew they wanted Tua. And I'm excited to see how it works, because I think it's a perfect match.
Yeah, I agree. Now, what is Tua Tagovailoa's ceiling as a player? Do you think he can become an elite quarterback one day, you know, or top 10? What do you think?
I don't think he'll be elite, because I think there's certain things that physically he's not really capable of doing that I see elite quarterbacks doing. You know, Drew Brees is probably the exception to the rule in terms of like physically limited quarterbacks that can still put up absolutely insane numbers. And we hope that Tua can eventually be Drew Brees, but I'm not about to declare him 100% going to be Drew Brees. Like that's like his skill set's similar, but you know, Drew Brees is kind of one of a kind on the field in that way. Tom Brady is the same kind of way. So do I think he'll ever be elite? Probably not, unless he becomes that kind of Hall of Fame caliber player. But I do think he can be a top 10 to 12 quarterback, which with the roster the Dolphins are building around him is probably going to be enough to be a playoff contender every single year. You know, if they really hit big and don't get injured, you know, maybe you could be a Super Bowl contender in a few years. I think they are trending that way, especially defensively. But he's, you know, you listen to Bucky Brooks and Daniel Jeremiah's podcast, Move the Sticks. They have a thing they like to say called trucks and trailers. Yeah. You know, is your quarterback a truck that pulls the trailer, or is he the trailer that gets pulled by the truck? He's more of a trailer type quarterback. Burrow's more of a truck, and that's fine with me. But you know, we just kind of have to be realistic about what he is.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that Tua is a pretty darn good quarterback, but I never really bought into the, you know, the next Drew Brees, the mix of Russ Wilson. I don't know about that, but I think that he's going to be pretty darn good in Miami, in a pretty good situation, I would say. Now let's get to Jalen Hurts. Now, based on what you've been saying, you seem to be a little bit higher on Jalen Hurts than most people. Now, I think that Jalen Hurts definitely can become a starting quarterback one day. I think that he is pretty darn good, pretty darn accurate. He doesn't have a world-class arm. He doesn't have elite arm talent, but there is a pretty good above-average arm, I would say. I really like his leadership qualities. His accuracy is good enough for me. He really improved as a decision-maker at Oklahoma, and from the time he got benched by Tua Tagovailoa in the national title game versus Georgia when Alabama was playing them to the time to where he is right now, that's a totally different quarterback. So I do think that Jalen Hurts can develop one day into being a starter. Now in Philadelphia, I don't think that he's going to be a starter anytime soon, simply because Carson Wentz is one of the 7 to 8 best quarterbacks in football, in my opinion, right now. And they didn't bring him in to be, you know, the starting quarterback. I don't think, you know, they clearly need a backup quarterback. Carson Wentz's health has been an issue the last couple of years, so they need a backup quarterback. But also, I think the Philadelphia Eagles realized that, hey, we got this guy in Jalen Hurts that can run some two quarterback sets with Carson Wentz. We can run some RPOs. I can only imagine a dream made in heaven for the Philadelphia Eagles when you have Jalen Reagor on the field, Marquise Goodwin, and Deshaun Jackson, and Jalen Hurts on the field with his ability to run the football in the RPO game, and he's not a bad thrower. I don't understand why Philadelphia Eagles fans are mad at that pick. I really don't. You clearly need a backup quarterback, and this guy, in my opinion, can be Taysom Hill plus. So, do you think that as an Eagles fan, that the fans should be mad about their pick? Because obviously they drafted Jalen Reagor. I thought they had a pretty good day 3 draft. Kind of talk about Jalen Hurts as a player first, then kind of talk about maybe how the Eagles are looking at as far as their team goes next year.
Yeah, and Jalen was my QB3 in this class for a reason, and it's almost like the polar opposite of Justin Herbert, where every single year you saw progression. Even when he was a backup at Alabama, he played significant snaps because they were blowing people out of the water every single week. So he was playing in the second half of, honestly, most of their games, really. And he was, believe it or not, the most accurate quarterback on down-the-field throws that year at Alabama. When he lost his job to Tua, he worked really, really hard. He came back. He was exceptionally accurate. But unfortunately, he had a quarterback in front of him that was a special player as well, so he just wasn't getting on the field. And then he transferred to Oklahoma, and even as a starter with a larger sampler size, he was, again, one of the most accurate quarterbacks in all of college football. On down-the-field throws, meaning 20-plus yards down the field, his on-target accuracy percentage was 3rd in the nation, just barely behind Joe Burrow. And in the year before that, he was higher than Joe Burrow. He was higher than Tua in both years, believe it or not. So he's a very accurate quarterback. His decision-making has gotten better every single year. Obviously, he's a great leader. He's a physical freak. He's excellent in terms of creating with his legs. Is he all the way there yet? No, but he's pretty damn close, and I think he could, if he was anywhere other than Philly, be a starter as a rookie and be okay. He wouldn't be great, but he was
kind of like Daniel Jones.
Yeah, very similar to Daniel Jones, but in my opinion, better. So I like, if I was going to have to choose between Jones coming out of Duke and Jalen coming out of OU/Alabama, I would take Jalen because I think his ceiling is higher. Now, in terms of how he fits with Philly, this is where it's interesting because I put out an episode on the Eagles offense, might have been about a month ago, talking about Jalen Reagor and how they're really trying to build for speed and kind of copy the Kansas City model of, whether it's zone or man, if we're running 4 verts, everything turns into man, and we've got 5 guys that run 4-4 or better. So see if you can keep up. That's really what they're going for with Reagor. Obviously, Deshaun Jackson, John Hightower runs 4-4-3. Marquise Goodwin is a 4-3 guy. They draft another one, Quez Watkins is a 4-3 guy. The slowest guy on the team is probably going to be J.J. Arcega-Whiteside or Alshon Jeffrey, whichever one of them they decide to keep. So they really only have one big body guy and then 4 or 5 really fast ones. And so I think when you look at how Hurts fits in, they're going to be using Carson and all of these fast guys in between the 20s to just rip off huge chunks. They're going to be working RPOs with the tight ends. They're going to have Miles Sanders, pounding the rock. And then when you get inside the red zone, where all those small, fast guys maybe aren't quite as effective, that's when you start mixing in Jalen Hurts. His athleticism gives you what's called a +1 advantage in the run game because if defenses have to account for the quarterback running, that takes somebody away from the run fit. So now you can kind of get even numbers in your blocking schemes, which then helps out Miles Sanders. And when the field is more compressed and that speed doesn't matter as much, that versatility in the run game is going to pay a huge dividend. And the fact that he's also an accurate passer and a better passer than Taysom Hill. So, imagine all the stuff that New Orleans has done in the red zone with Taysom Hill and then add on to it. And then you also have an MVP caliber quarterback that gets them into the red zone in the first place. Like, this offense is going to be multiple. It's going to be really hard to prepare for. There's 2 quarterbacks that can do everything. And I think it's going to be really, really fun to watch. As long as the Eagles defense plays better than it did last year, like, this to me is a Super Bowl caliber team. Absolutely.
Now, really quick, I want to, get your thoughts on Carson Wentz as the quarterback. I felt he played pretty darn well this year, considering the parts that he had around him. not very good wide receivers. You know, you obviously had Deshaun Jackson, Alshon Jeffrey. They are getting older. They have declined. And he had a ton of injuries to deal with. So kind of talk about how great of a season Carson Wentz had and just where you see him among quarterbacks in today's NFL. Is he closer to elite that people really are willing to give him credit for? I don't know if I'm willing to put him in the top 5 category quite yet, but I think that he's right there. He's right outside that category. So what are your thoughts on Carson Wentz? What do you see on film?
If, let's just say...
really quickly. Is he better than Dak Prescott? I want to know that because Cowboys fans kind of get triggered about that.
Yeah, he's better than Dak. Not that Dak's bad, but Carson to me is a top 5 quarterback. You know,
you think he's top 5?
Yeah, like if I was going to go around the league and say, okay, what quarterbacks would I rather have than a healthy Carson Wentz? Let's just assume every quarterback in the league is healthy.
Okay.
Because it's easier to do that baseline.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're talking Pat Mahomes. We're talking Russell Wilson. Maybe Aaron. That's a maybe.
Watson, maybe?
Yeah, it's a maybe. Healthy Cam Newton, I would definitely put in there. But, you know, we're talking 2 definitives and 3 maybes. Like, so at worst, he's top 5 to me. He can make every throw. He's mobile, great decision maker. You know, he dragged a team that had no receivers to the playoffs. None. Like, Greg Ward was their number 1 receiver on the team by the end of the year. Like, you can't do that unless you're a special quarterback. And, you know, he was an MVP contender, front runner in 2017 before he got hurt for a reason. Because he's a really damn good quarterback. And when he's healthy, you know, he averages about 2 missed games a year. But when he's healthy, he is phenomenal. And there's very few guys that I would definitively take over him.
Sounds good, man. Sounds good. I want to get to Jacob Eason a little bit right here. I think that Jacob Eason has a lot of talent. I think that his arm was the best arm in this year's draft. I think he's a little bit more mobile than people give him credit for. People think that he's a statue in the pocket. I don't quite see that, but again, he needs a better offensive line than most quarterbacks. But again, in Indianapolis, that's a pretty darn good offensive line. Michael Pittman's a pretty good player. T.Y. Hilton is pretty good when he's healthy. They have 2 very good running backs that I like in Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack. And I didn't think Jacob Eason was ready to start like right away in the NFL this year. But if he gets a chance to sit behind Phillip Rivers, learn from Frank Wright and the offensive staff, I really do think that Jacob Eason is going to be a pretty good quarterback in Indianapolis. You know, I think that he needs to continue to get better as far as reading defenses go. But again, outside of that, I think that he has all the tools. What do you think?
You know, my main problem with Eason, you know, he's obviously got all the talent in the world. You know, him and Josh Allen probably are kind of neck and neck in terms of best arm in the league right now. Because Eason's arm is just absurd. Like, it's even better than Herbert's, and that's saying a lot because Herbert's arm is special.
No doubt.
You know, so Eason's got a cannon, but the problem is he doesn't take any gas off of his throws sometimes, and I really want to see him kind of learn to throw with touch and timing and anticipation, and instead of, you know, he's very much a see it, throw it kind of quarterback where, you know, he might process a little bit late, so he has to throw with incredible velocity to still hit the window, and that sometimes makes it a little bit harder for his receivers. You know, if he can just kind of process a tick quicker so that he can throw with a little bit more touch and layer the ball in there to the right spot rather than gunning it in there to the right spot, I think he can be a much improved quarterback. He's still probably not ready to play for a year or 2. I think they brought him in specifically to sit behind Rivers and probably sit behind Brissett as well. Like, at this point, he is the 3rd best quarterback on the team, easily. Like, I would start the other 2 over him all day. But he has the potential in a couple of years to kind of get on the field, and we can see what he can do. But really the main thing is just learning to throw with touch, timing, and anticipation, because right now he just doesn't do that.
Gotcha. And I agree with you. I really do. So I'm very fascinated by Isaiah Simmons. You know, I felt the New York Giants actually should have took Isaiah Simmons at number 4. I'm not going to knock them for, you know, getting Daniel Jones some help on the offensive line. I think that Andrew Thomas is going to change the fortunes of that offensive line in New York, so I'm not going to knock them for that. It's just not the move I would have made, because I think when you're picking in the top 4, when you can get a generational talent at linebacker / Mike linebacker, whatever you want to call Isaiah Simmons, maybe safety, I think you need to do it. And I just think that Isaiah Simmons is going to come right into Arizona and dominate. I mean, this guy can play inside linebacker, outside linebacker, strong safety, free safety. He played a little defensive, cornerback at Clemson. The versatility is off the charts. And in their division, I think you need those types of players because you have to cover George Kittle. You have to, chase down Russell Wilson and those great Seattle Seahawks running backs. So I think that he fits in perfectly for what Arizona's trying to do. I really like the direction the Cardinals are going in. So how do you think he fits in with their defense? What is his ceiling as a player? I think that he can be an all-pro level player, no doubt. And I really want to ask you, do you think he can play middle linebacker? I think he really can. I don't get the idea that he's too small to play middle linebacker. I just don't understand that. The guy is 6'4", 240, maybe a little bit undersized, but I want that guy around the ball. I want him on the inside, chasing down those running backs. I think that he can cover those tight ends if he needs to. So where does Isaiah Simmons fit best, and where do you see him as a player and as a prospect?
You ask if he can play middle linebacker. I would only play him at middle linebacker. I don't think he's a safety. I don't think he's a nickel. I don't think he's an outside linebacker. I think he really is a Mike linebacker in a modern NFL defense. He's not a good enough pass rusher to be a pure edge. I don't think his feet are quick enough to be a nickel. His range and everything is fine for being a free safety, but I think it's a waste to put him that far away from the ball. I want him to be a Mike linebacker where he can use his speed. You just kind of draw a box from numbers to numbers and say, this is your area, go get it. And, kind of use that range and everything to go make plays at the linebacker position. And, we saw the Cardinals say that he's going to start at linebacker, only linebacker, and people got pissed off by that, but that's the best decision. Like, overloading him with 4 different spots as a rookie with no offseason because of this virus, that would be a disaster for him. It's better to start him at Mike, and then if you maybe want to work him into playing some other spots, you can down the line, but trying to overload a kid with that much positional versatility, that would be detrimental for his career. So I only want him playing Mike linebacker, and to be honest, if he stuck there for the entirety of his career, he would be much better off for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I did not get the pushback as far as saying that he's not a middle linebacker. He's too small. Oh, stop it. I did not understand it, so I'm glad we agree on that. Now, as far as teams that had pretty darn good drafts, I felt the Baltimore Ravens had a great draft. I really like what the Cowboys did. But in a couple of your videos, I also like what the Denver Broncos did too. Those were probably the 3 teams I would say that had the best drafts. But you think the New York Jets had the best draft. And I would categorize their draft as very underrated. I'm not gonna be mad if someone says that they're one of the 5 best winners of the draft, because I think that Denzel Mims is a stud. To get him in the second round that late is kind of highway robbery in my opinion. Mekhi Becton has all the potential in the world. You mentioned Ashton Davis a little bit in your episodes, a guy that kind of failed, has a lot of talent. And then you get to the kid out of Virginia. I forget his name. Bryce Hall. Yes, Bryce Hall. Yeah, Bryce Hall. So talk about what the Jets got as far as their draft picks, and do you think they had the best draft? Is that correct?
I think they had a top 3 draft. It's between them, Cleveland, and Denver for me in terms of who had the best draft. But when you look at who they started off 1, 2, 3, I mean, Mekhi Becton is a franchise left tackle from day one. I loved everything about him. He was my second-rated tackle in this draft, and they got him. I think it was the 4th tackle off the board, if I remember correctly. Or it might have been 3rd, but he is an incredible talent. Much better pass protector than he gets credit for, not to mention being an absolutely monstrous run blocker. Denzel Mims, I did an episode on. I think he compares favorably to DeAndre Hopkins in terms of skill set. Not quite the same ball skills, but still great ball skills. But he's got a little bit more vertical juice than Hopkins had coming out of Clemson. But in terms of play style, how they run routes, how they manipulate leverage, physicality, and length, like they're basically the same guy in that regard. And then Ashton Davis in round 3, the only reason he fell was, again, because of this virus, because he couldn't get a medical recheck on his groin, which is fully healed. He would have been a first-round pick, in my opinion, if he was able to get a medical recheck after the combine, where he got checked out on his groin. So it was unfortunate circumstances for him, but excellent for the Jets because they got a first-round talent in the 3rd round. Bryce Hall, again, was a victim of not having any medical rechecks. He was probably a day 2 pick that the 5th. Jabari Zuniga, I think, is a really good get for them as a rotational edge player. Um, really just kind of an ass kicker against the run. I think he was a better player than his teammate Jonathan Bernard, who a lot of people mocked in the second round. I thought Zuniga was better than him coming out. So, from top to bottom, everybody just pick after pick the Jets took. They probably got 6 starters in this class, which is absurd to me to get that many starters and quality starters at that. Just an incredible haul by them.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they had a pretty good draft, no doubt. Now, I want to get your thoughts on Sam Darnold really quickly. What do you see as far as him on film, and how good is Sam Darnold right now? What does he need to work on? I think that he's kind of a little bit reckless at times, makes some poor decisions, but I got to be honest with you. The Jets don't have a great supporting cast around Sam Darnold, and he's the reason they win games. So I do worry about his turnovers. I don't like his playing style at times, but hey, he takes risks, and sometimes he's going to definitely burn you. So kind of talk about what you see as far as Sam Darnold, and how good can he actually become if the Jets really support him with the talent that they need to support him with.
Yeah, decision-making under pressure, I think, has been an issue for him. Obviously we saw, in the Patriot game on primetime last year, they were throwing blitz zero at him. They were doing all these coverage rolls and everything, and he couldn't keep up. And there's a lot of young quarterbacks that can't keep up with that, and he unfortunately fell victim to it. He missed early parts of the season with mono, so maybe he wasn't totally ready yet to play. But I think I just kind of hope that he was a little bit further along than he is right now in terms of handling post-snap coverage rolls where they're showing him one thing and then rolling to something else. I kind of want to see him get to his answer for those a little bit quicker. And I feel like he kind of takes the bait a little bit too much, too. So it's really more of a vision and decision-making issue for me, less than accuracy and physical talent. I kind of hope he works on that this offseason.
So mentally he's not where you think he needs to be, but physically he's pretty good.
Physically, I think he's fine. Accuracy can be a little bit inconsistent at times, but it's not as bad as I think some people kind of blow it up to be. Really, to me, it's decision-making under pressure, or just decision-making when people change the picture on him after the ball is snapped that really gives him trouble. Same kind of thing as Daniel Jones, to be honest.
Gotcha. 2 New York quarterbacks. That's pretty interesting right there. Who do you think is actually better right now, Jones or Darnold? Who would you rather have?
Ooh.
I kind of lean toward Daniel Jones. I liked what I saw from Daniel Jones this year. He's mobile. The thing I like about Daniel Jones is he gets the ball out of his hands pretty quickly. When he sees a guy open, the ball's getting there. That's what I see on film. And I think that Daniel Jones probably doesn't have the arm talent that Darnold has. Not saying that Darnold has this world-class arm, but at times Jones struggles to push the ball down the field in really tight windows. But outside of very good arm talent, I think Daniel Jones is pretty good. And I don't know about the situation he's in with the Giants just because I don't know if Joe Judge can coach, but I think if you support Daniel Jones with enough talent around him, he's going to be pretty good.
My problem with Jones, it's kind of a different problem than Darnold, but they're fruits from the same tree. Whereas Darnold, I think, reacts poorly under pressure. Jones flat out doesn't feel the pressure. Like, his pocket presence is atrocious. And I think that's part of the reason why they went Andrew Thomas instead of Isaiah Simmons, because I think his lack of awareness of pressure and his lack of awareness of a collapsing pocket won't hurt him as much if the pocket isn't collapsing as much. That's why they really prioritize taking Andrew Thomas, because their quarterback is really bad at manipulating the pocket to his advantage.
They call him Danny Fumbles.
Taking bad fumbles, taking bad sacks, not getting the ball out quickly enough, by not feeling pressure. He also got baited on some coverage rolls himself, doing some rookie mistakes. But really, that's my big problem with Jones, and I'm not sure how fixable it is. Because, sometimes either you just got it or you don't in terms of your ability to feel pressure without seeing it. And for him, if he doesn't see the pressure, I don't see him moving out of the way.
Got it. So, Brett, I didn't get an answer. Who do you want? Sam Darnold or Daniel Jones? You got to make a decision. Or either you're fired tomorrow or you're on the hot seat. Who do you want?
I'll probably stick with Darnold. I'm kind of going back to my pre-draft grade on both. They both have had their moments. But what I saw from Darnold at USC gave me a little bit more hope than what I saw from Jones coming out. And maybe we'll change that at the end of this coming season. But I also feel like Darnold's problems are a little bit more fixable than Jones's are. So, like if I had to start a franchise with either one of them, it would probably be Darnold. But if I had the option to draft somebody else, maybe that would be even more appealing.
That's pretty funny right there. I think we're going to agree to disagree. I would take Daniel Jones. I don't feel great about either. I like Daniel Jones. I think he's a franchise quarterback, definitely, but I think that he needs to clean some things up. But yeah, I like him a lot, and I don't know. Darnold, I just don't know if he has the it factor, but only time will tell. But since we've kind of been talking about Daniel Jones a little bit, I want to get your thoughts on some of these other 2019 quarterbacks that were drafted. Let's switch to the Washington Redskins and Dwayne Haskins. I want to talk about the Redskins team first, then we'll get to Haskins a little bit. I think the Redskins are moving in a pretty good direction. I really do. Now, I understand that the front office has been a question, but I think that they're finally making some moves at the top that give me some hope and optimism. Firing Bruce Allen, bringing in a new medical staff. They hired Ron Rivera, a guy that's been to a Super Bowl, a guy that's a consistent head coach. I at least think that at worst case scenario, Ron Rivera is going to be their coach there for at least the next 3 years. They brought in Jack Del Rio because I don't think that they were getting the most out of the defensive line they had in the first place, because I know they added Chase Young, but they had Montez Sweat, they had Deron Payne, they had Jonathan Allen, and I just think that the defense consistently underperformed. And Chase Young, man, that guy's a monster, and you think he's the best pass rusher you ever evaluated. And I think that I gotta say the same thing, man. And I think their linebackers are better than people give them credit for. Reuben Foster and Cole Holcomb are not bad. I really think their wide receiver core is very underrated. Terry McLaurin, I think he's a stud. I really like Gandy Golden coming out of Liberty. I really like him. I think that Steven Simmons is a big play waiting to happen at times. They don't really have a tight end, but yeah, they got Kelvin Harmon. I like their wide receivers. And let's get to Dwayne Haskins right now. Obviously, Dwayne Haskins kind of had an up and down rookie season, but I still like Dwayne Haskins a lot. I do. I think he has the arm talent, the accuracy, the decision-making, the football IQ, and the swagger to turn the Redskins around. I really do. I think that if you give Dwayne Haskins the support he needs, he's going to be pretty darn good. And the last couple of games of the season, he got better and better with a bad coaching staff that did not want him at times. The offensive line was not great. The wide receivers outside of Terry weren't great last year either, and he got better and better. The last 3 games of the season, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. So I'm sold on Dwayne Haskins. I know that people want to look at the 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I think you have to judge him post Jay Gruden, because once Jay Gruden got out that building, Dwayne Haskins looked pretty good. So am I crazy thinking the Washington Redskins are a team that's really on the uprise? Because I think when you have a defensive line that's that good and that has that much potential, they're just going to overpower people and win games off of defense and running the football with their great running backs that they have. Darius Geis is pretty good. What's his name? Antonio Gibson. I like him a lot. So where do you fall on Haskins and the Redskins going forward?
Yeah, I'm probably in the same boat as you on Haskins, where it's unfair to judge him based on Jay Gruden, because Gruden just flat out didn't want him. And the head coaching and quarterback relationship is so crucial for development. And when it's very clear that a head coach flat out doesn't want a quarterback, it's unfortunate that he just wasn't developed properly. So I don't really hold his rookie year against him. And again, like you said, when Gruden was gone, we saw a drastic improvement. And I think he kind of showed towards the end of the year, the last 2 or 3 games of the year, what he can be. He was accurate. He made some really great downfield throws. His pocket presence was great. I think his teammates responded to him better. So I think when you kind of look at who is around him now, they kind of upgraded the offensive line a little bit in the offseason, which they desperately needed to do. They got some more weapons. You still have Terry McLaurin. I'm a big fan of Antonio Gibson. I think that backfield is absolutely loaded. The defense is obviously loaded as well, especially in the front 7. Like, there's some pieces here. Do I think they're going to be as good as Philly or as good as Dallas? No. But I do think we're going to see some pretty drastic improvement in the Redskins this year. I would probably expect somewhere around 8-8 to 9-7.
So you think they can win 8 or 9 games?
I do, mostly because of their defense and because of their run game. And I think, Haskins, at least now, really there's going to need him to make like 3 or 4 really good throws a game, attacking down the field, and then kind of the backfield and everything else will take care of the rest, and the defense will take care of the rest as well. So they don't need him to kind of carry the team right now. It's really going to be a defensive team, a run the ball kind of team, and as long as he doesn't make mistakes, they'll be fine. And I think he's not going to make as many mistakes in year 2 as he did in year 1 because his coaching staff is a hell of a lot more committed to developing him, and he's got a few extra weapons to work with and a better offensive line to work with as well. So I'm pretty optimistic. I think they're moving in the right direction. I don't think they're going to win the division this year or next year. But in maybe 3 years or so, as they're kind of filling out the roster, and Haskins has more experience in year 4 and year 5, towards the end of that rookie quarterback window, that's when I expect to see Washington to make a real push.
Yeah, and let me get your thoughts on Chase Young as a player and kind of the players the Redskins brought in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, if there was ever a guy that compares favorably to Julius Peppers, it's him. He is the Myles Garrett physical profile, but with the technical development of the Bosa brothers. He's a special player that has an arsenal of pass rush moves. He's incredibly athletic. He's long, he's strong, he's fluid, he's explosive. There's nothing wrong with him. There's flat out nothing wrong with him. I've never seen any pass rusher as complete as him. And for all the near perfect pass rush grades that I've given, Myles Garrett was up there, Khalil Mack was up there, Jadeveon Clowney was up there. Like, in terms of all those guys where it's not quite perfect, but pretty damn close, he's even better than them. If there ever was a perfect prospect to me, it's Chase Young.
Yeah, I think that he's going to be pretty darn good. I like the direction the Redskins are going in. I understand the pushback, but either way, I want to get to Daniel Jones and the Giants a little bit more and kind of talk about their draft, the draft that they had, and how do you think Daniel Jones can potentially progress with Jason Garrett as his offensive coordinator? Obviously Darius Slayton had a pretty solid rookie season, being a 5th-round pick. Evan Ingram hopefully stays healthy. I think the Giants are making some okay moves to improve their team, but again, it comes down to coaching, and I just don't believe in Joe Judge. I don't know if he can coach. So I'm not going to say that I'm out on the Giants improving as a team, but they have a really tough schedule, and I'm just in wait-and-see mode with the Giants because they're kind of like that person that your friend that just, for whatever reason, does things differently. The Giants, they take Saquon Barkley over a quarterback, which is fine, but, I mean, I don't know. Daniel Jones over Haskins. Daniel Jones wins round 1, but will he win round number 2 or number 3? I don't know. So, kind of talk about the state of the Giants, and should their fans be optimistic?
When it comes to the Giants, I'm going to borrow a little bit from Colin Cowherd here, who doesn't say a whole lot that I agree with, but I do agree with this, in that he rates teams on how dynamic they are. Do you have a dynamic quarterback? Do you have dynamic playmakers that can score? Do you have dynamic defensive players that can take away the football? Do you have a dynamic coaching staff that is creative and aggressive and really knows how to tailor a game plan to their talent? And the Giants, they have some dynamic pieces in Saquon Barkley and Evan Ingram, but other than that, not a whole lot. I don't consider Daniel Jones to be a dynamic quarterback. I don't consider Jason Garrett to be a dynamic play caller on offense. I don't really know what Joe Judge is yet, so it's hard for me to kind of figure him out at the moment. I'm not saying he's not dynamic. I just don't know what he is yet. So there's not a whole lot of dynamic players on this team. There's good players. They've drafted a lot of really good players in the last couple of years. Andrew Thomas, I like. Xavier McKinney is a 2nd-round pick I like. It's kind of like a do-it-all safety. Shane Lemieux, who they got as a value in the 5th round, I think is going to be a really good swing guard for them. They took Julian Love. They took, they got Jabril Peppers in a trade. Dexter
Lawrence, the defensive tackle out of Clemson, yeah.
They've taken some really good players the last couple of years, but other than Saquon and Ingram, I don't really see any game-changing players that can absolutely, even if a defense does everything right, that they can still just absolutely house it anytime they need to. So I think they're solid, but not spectacular. And usually a solid roster can only be elevated by a spectacular quarterback or a spectacular coach. And I just don't think they have either one of those right now, especially with Jason Garrett calling the plays. So I think they're going to be fine, but I don't necessarily consider them contenders in the same way that I do the Eagles or Dallas right now. Like, not even close.
Gotcha. I want to get to the Denver Broncos. I love what the Denver Broncos are doing, especially what they're doing as far as developing their young quarterback, Drew Lock. Now, I felt that Drew Lock was worth a first round pick when he came out, but I wasn't quite sold. But again, I felt he could play. He's got a pretty big arm. He's mobile. He can make some throws, but I think that Drew Lock is going to break out this year. I really do. They got Cortland Sutton. They've got Noah Fant. They've got Jerry Jeudy. They've got KJ Hamler. Honestly, as long as Drew Lock doesn't just stink up the joint, this offense is going to be pretty good. They improved the offensive line. They have 2 running backs I like. And their defense is pretty good as well. With Vic Fangio leading the charge, Bradley Chubb comes back, Von Miller's pretty good. Jarrell Casey, I like him a lot. AJ Boye is a pretty underrated number 1 cornerback. So, am I crazy to think that Drew Lock can break out this year? I know that he didn't play a whole lot this year, but what do you see as far as the quarterback, Drew Lock, and how good can the Broncos be? I think they're a playoff team this year.
Yeah, and it's kind of the opposite of the Giants. Look at how many dynamic pieces they have. Pat Shurmur, not a great head coach, but as a play caller, as an offensive coordinator, he's really, really good. I consider him dynamic. Jerry Jeudy, dynamic weapon. KJ Hamler, dynamic deep threat. Phillip Lindsay, legit 4-3. Melvin Gordon, again, dynamic. Noah Fant, extremely athletic, dynamic. Like, they have so much talent on offense that even when the defense does their job, they can still score points. And so I look at them a lot more favorably than I do a lot of other teams around the league just because of all the incredibly explosive, dynamic threats they have on offense and defense. You still got Von Miller. You still got Bradley Chubb. Kareem Jackson's an excellent safety, even as old as he is now. Like, he's really damn good. They had a young linebacker, Alexander Johnson, who stepped up last year. They drafted McTelvin Agim, out of Arkansas, who I consider to be a really good 3-technique prospect. So, like, they have a lot going for them right now. And in terms of teams that I expect to be, kind of in the driver's seat for the AFC over the next few years, like, Denver's up near the top.
I agree, and I think that they've really built their team to keep up with Kansas City. Kansas City is going to dare you to keep up, and they got pass rushers to get after Mahomes. So look out, Kansas City, but Kansas City probably still wins that division, I would say. I want to get to Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals. I think that Cardinals fans should be excited. I think that as a Texans fan, probably not happy that DeAndre Hopkins is gone. Sorry, Brett, because I know you're a Texans fan, but yeah, they got DeAndre Hopkins now. I felt that Andy Isabella and Christian Kirk are good, but do they have a number 1 wide receiver? Well, guess what? Now they got one of the 3 best wide receivers in all of football in DeAndre Hopkins. And I gotta be honest with you, I don't think Kyler Murray is quite there yet, but in about 2 to 3 seasons, I think Kyler Murray can be one of the 5 best quarterbacks in football. I don't know if you agree with me, but I see the dynamic arm. I see the accuracy. I see the things you just can't teach. And Kyler Murray just has some of those things that you just can't teach. He has a pretty good football IQ. A lot of people don't give him credit for that. And, the offensive line, I think, is going to be better this year if he gets the ball in his hands a little bit more quickly, if he processes things better. I think that Josh Jones was a steal. And obviously they brought in Isaiah Simmons. Again, we talked about dynamic players. Isaiah Simmons is dynamic. They've got Chandler Jones. And I think that Kyler Murray is going to be one of the quarterbacks that actually kind of breaks out this year. I don't know if Arizona is going to make the playoffs this year because I think their roster still has some holes in it. But I think they're going to be vying for a playoff spot potentially. With that extra playoff spot, they could be a dark horse. So what is Kyler Murray's ceiling? Can he be a top 5 quarterback one day? Because I think he can be. And how do you think that DeAndre Hopkins fits in with their offense? And what do you think about the Cardinals this year?
Yeah, and Hopkins is a perfect fit because they really needed a boundary threat that could go up and get it and fight for contested passes. Because Kyler is one of the, even as a rookie, he's one of the best fade throwers in the whole league in terms of his touch, his timing, his placement. On fades, anything down the field outside the numbers, he is ridiculous. It's very Aaron Rodgers-esque, when Aaron was young in his career, just throwing these darts that you don't know how the hell he fit it in there. Kyler's the same kind of guy. And so to have a guy like Hopkins that can pay that off, where you just put it in the right zip code and he's going to make you right, that's a phenomenal get by them. And not even having to spend a first-round pick on it's really insane. Christian Kirk, I think, is a really good young slot receiver. Larry Fitzgerald, even in his old age, is still reliable, dependable Larry. He's always going to be. Andy Isabella, I wasn't a huge fan of coming out of the draft, but he's got legit deep speed. So really, you just kind of hope to get him the ball 2 or 3 times a game and hope that one of them's for 60 yards, and he already pays for himself. Hakeem Butler is another really good jump ball artist that unfortunately was dealing with some injuries as a rookie, but their top 5 receivers on that depth chart all have a role, and they're all really good at their role. The offensive line, I still think, isn't all the way there, but I really like the Josh Jones pick in the 3rd. I thought he was going to be a first-round pick, so to get him in the 3rd is pretty insane. Really good pass protector, an immediate upgrade over Marcus Gilbert. And, if you have an offensive line that can at least give him a little bit more time, that means you don't have to run as many 6- and 7-man protections. You can kind of get 5 guys out in the route where Kyler's more comfortable, really spread defenses out and let him just kind of play point guard. So, tight end is probably the only real hole left on that offense, which is fine because they don't really use the tight end in this offense that much anyway. So I really like the Cardinals. I think their defense is a lot of young talent. Their offense is a lot of young talent. And I think Cliff Kingsbury is a dynamic head coach. So, again, love what the Cardinals are doing. I think it's going to be them and Seattle and San Francisco all fighting for the division all the way till Week 17.
I tend to agree. Once again, we are joined by Brett Kollmann, football analyst. He's got a YouTube channel. He's got a podcast, the Bootleg Football Podcast. Be sure to check that out. You will not regret it if you're a football fan. I appreciate you for coming on, Brett, once again. And we're going to talk some Houston Texans football right here. So I want to get your thoughts on Deshaun Watson because you are a Texans fan, but you're pretty unbiased. You just look at the film and you tell the people what they need to hear, what you see. And honestly, Deshaun Watson's not the most perfect player. I think that he still needs to be a little more surgical in the pocket. At times, his deep ball accuracy can be hit and miss, but I see a guy as a top 5 quarterback in football right now. I really do. And I think that he's the second best young quarterback in football besides Patrick Mahomes. Now, I think that you're more of a Carson Wentz fan than Deshaun Watson fan. You kind of talked about Carson Wentz a little bit earlier, but we're splitting hairs right here. Deshaun Watson, pretty darn good quarterback. I think that he's pretty good. I think that he's a top 5 quarterback right now. I wanted to see him in the playoffs because the Indianapolis Colts game last year was not great. But versus the Buffalo Bills, when the offensive line was not blocking, he didn't have much of a run game. Will Fuller was out. That guy rose to the occasion. I said, yeah, that's a guy that's a top 5 quarterback. I don't think that Bill O'Brien's always put him in the best situations to succeed. I think that at times he has to play perfect for them to win. Houston got outgained last year. They're just a very talented team, but sometimes a roller coaster. So what do you see as far as Deshaun Watson goes as a quarterback on film? I see an accurate quarterback that makes good decisions. He still has some things he needs to work on, but I'm sold on Deshaun Watson. As long as Bill O'Brien doesn't screw things up and the Houston Texans offensive line continues to get better, the sky's the limit. What do you think?
Yeah, really the only problem with Deshaun, it's not even really a problem, it's just he tries to make too many huge plays instead of just kind of throwing the ball away sometimes. He'll take some sacks that are honestly kind of his fault for just not getting rid of it because he's always trying to make a play. He's a home run hitter, and we hate him for it sometimes, but then he'll actually hit the home run and we love it. So he's definitely more of a gambler than a lot of the other quarterbacks in that top 5 discussion, but he has it pay off more often than not. So I think if he became a little bit less aggressive at times, he might preserve his body a little bit more instead of getting banged up. But at the same time, his aggression overall is kind of what makes those huge plays. So you take the bad with the good, and overall hope the good just kind of outweighs the bad, which usually it does. But again, he's one of those dynamic quarterbacks that even when the defense is right, he can make them wrong just because of how special he is as a talent. So overall, I don't disagree with you that he's a top 5 quarterback. I just don't know where I would put him in that top 5.
Gotcha. I think that he's around number 4. I'd say that Mahomes, Wilson, Rodgers, I'd say Watson, then probably Lamar Jackson. That's just my opinion. But, hey, I just put my opinions out there. But either way, kind of talk about the team, how they performed this past year. You're obviously a Texans fan. I'm a huge Deshaun Watson fan, so when my Packers aren't playing, I kind of root for the Texans. Obviously, the team goes 10-6 last year. I said that once Andrew Luck retired, that opens up a window for Houston to dominate the division. And I think that next year they're probably going to win the division just simply because they have the best quarterback. They have the most dynamic players in that division. Tennessee is pretty good. Indianapolis, we'll kind of wait and see with Philip Rivers. And the Jaguars, I'm not even going to talk about them. But yeah, I mean, Laramie Tunsil comes in. Tyus Howard comes in. Sharping, they improve the offensive line. Now, Houston, you get the good with the bad. You beat Kansas City and New England one week, then you're losing to Kyle Allen and a rookie quarterback and Drew Lock at home. So, again, it wasn't perfect, but the team made the playoffs. The Bills game was kind of hard to watch, but, hey, they got it done in Houston Texans fashion. And I'm sorry, Brett, but after that Chiefs loss, I said Bill O'Brien needs to be fired. I'm just not sold. And when you have a generational talent at quarterback in Deshaun Watson, you need to maximize that window. And Bill O'Brien's not a terrible head coach, but I just don't know. I think the team's reached their ceiling. He's lost a lot of playoff games that have been blowouts, 30-0 to Kansas City. The Colts game wasn't great. And as the GM, I don't know. So kind of talk about how the season went and where the team is right now.
I don't think they're going to win the division because of Bill O'Brien. Like, I don't see them outplaying the Colts and outplaying the Titans because of who their head coach is. This is a team that consistently disappoints in big moments because of their head coach. There were reports that he was so wrapped up in GM duties last year that he wasn't even part of offensive install. So he would roll in there on Saturdays and change, the game plan the day before the game, which is part of the reason why they always started so slow, because their head coach wasn't even involved in the game plan until the last minute. Not to mention because of injuries in the receiving core and just guys being banged up. And veteran days, Deshaun was practicing with fourth and fifth string receivers with a game plan that would get changed 24 hours before they took the field. So they almost never started fast because of that. And I don't anticipate that's going to suddenly change in 2020 either, because he's still the general manager. He's still going to be doing that stuff and then getting involved in install late in the process rather than early in the process. And, when you look at all the embarrassing losses they had last year, the Saints game, they should have won it. Embarrassing loss. They barely held on against the Jacksonville Jaguars. They were getting their ass kicked by the Chargers till late in the game. They did get their ass kicked by the Panthers. Then they came back and beat a very woeful Falcons defense early in the year that didn't kind of bounce back till late in the season. They got the big win at Kansas City, but then lost against the Colts. And it's so ill. And then a few weeks later, they got absolutely lambasted by the Ravens, an actual well-coached team. And then they got killed by the Broncos at home also. Like, all these actual well-coached football teams beat the brakes off of them or were able to come back late and steal wins from them because they're not well coached. And so I don't really have any faith in them winning the division until Bill O'Brien is fired. And even if they do win the division, they're sure as hell not going to win the Super Bowl because all these other teams in the AFC that have better head coaches.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that Bill O'Brien is there, and until the team kind of misses the playoffs and has a bad season, he's going to stay there. And because my whole thing is, Bill O'Brien's now in a position of power. And I said he should have been fired after the Chiefs game. I really did. I said that it was debatable after the Colts game last year in the playoffs. But yeah, after that Chiefs game, I said this guy needs to be fired. You need to clean house. You need to get a real general manager in there because you don't want to waste Deshaun Watson's best year. And he's still on his rookie deal. You got about 1 or 2 years left. Yeah, that window's closing pretty fast until Deshaun Watson gets actually paid. So it's a bad situation. I want your thoughts on Bill O'Brien as the general manager because the DeAndre Hopkins trade, look, everyone can talk about, Deshaun has more weapons. He's got Randall Cobb. He's got, Brandon Cooks. And I understand you're going to spread the ball a little bit more, but in the playoffs, when the game slows down, you need that guy to beat the best defensive back. You need the guy to throw it up to on 3rd and 10 and say, take me there, wide receiver. And DeAndre Hopkins was that guy. And I think the Texans offense might be better during the regular season, but during the playoffs, I don't know. So how do you think about Bill O'Brien as the general manager? Because it's not pretty.
Yeah, and like you said, you look at the teams they're going to have to play in the playoffs. It's going to be Buffalo. It's going to be Baltimore. And who are the receivers on the team that are going to beat Tre'Davious White? Who are the receivers on the team that's going to beat Marcus Peters and Marlon Humphrey? They don't have any. They've got Will Fuller, if he's healthy, which is maybe for half the year. They have Brandon Cooks, who averages 60 yards a game over the last 3 seasons. And you're getting a guy that's averaging less than 60 yards a game. You got Randall Cobb, who at this age is not a dynamic player anymore. Like, who is your receiver that can go out there and beat Humphrey, that can beat Peters, that can beat Tre'Davious White? They don't have one. They just flat out don't have one. Even Miami. Let's say Miami sneaks in there as a wild card.
They got 3 good defensive backs. Xavier Howard. Yeah.
They would get absolutely killed because they have good receivers ish. Well, at least a couple of them, but they don't have a dynamic, reliable, absolutely just beast of a top 3 receiver that they used to. That regardless of who was on the field, you could count on to win. They don't have that anymore. So I don't know what the hell they're going to do. I think it was a terrible decision. I think he's made some good decisions. I think the Titus Howard pick ended up being he was more correct on that one than I was. I was really hoping for Andre Dillard. He took Titus Howard, and Howard was a better player last year. So that was a good decision. I like the Ross Blacklock pick. I like the John Root pick this year as well. There have been some good roster management decisions over the last couple of years, but they're outweighed by so many terrible ones. How the Jadeveon Clowney situation was handled, how the DeAndre Hopkins situation was handled, losing Dwayne Brown. The roster has lost so many great players that were replaced by good ones, which in the end is still a net negative. The roster today is worse than it was 3 years ago, and that's saying a lot.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, man. I feel for you Texans fans, right? I really do. And as a Packers fan, I mean, at least I know my team's not going to be the Cleveland Browns, because we got a quarterback in the future in Jordan Love that I like. But you mentioned that you don't think the Texans are going to win the division. Personally, I disagree. I think that Deshaun Watson's going to somehow overcome things. And I don't know. I just look at quarterbacks and I say, okay, when you have a guy like Deshaun Watson, you have a chance to win 8 to 10 games each year off their greatness alone. I understand that Indianapolis made some moves. Michael Pittman's a good player. We'll see what Phil Rivers does with a better offensive line. I don't know. I think Houston's still going to sneak out this division and win it. I think the offensive line is going to take a step, hopefully. Deshaun is Deshaun. He's going to be great. You're going to get top 5 quarterback play there. J.J. Watt's a very good edge rusher. The defensive line is solid. It's not great, but it's solid. If the secondary improves with Conley and Roby, then yeah, you might have something. I don't see this team as a Super Bowl contender. I see them as about a 10-6 team, maybe 11-5 if things really go well. But yeah, who do you think is going to actually win this division? And about how many wins do you see the Texans getting? I think you're probably around the 9-7, 8-8 range because you don't believe in Bill O'Brien.
Yeah, I would probably say like 9-7 is about right for Houston, solely because of Deshaun Watson. In terms of who I think is going to win the division, probably Tennessee. If I had to pick, I'd probably say the Titans. I think after Tannehill got in there, they were a better team. They were the best team in the division after Tannehill took over. They kind of fell behind in the division early because of Marcus Mariota, but after they made that switch, they were the best team in the division. I don't really see any reason why that won't continue. Not to mention they had a pretty good draft themselves, and they got some pretty damn good players. So I would probably lean Tennessee out of all 4 teams.
I want to get your thoughts on Marcus Mariota really quickly. I was not very sold on Mariota coming out of college. I just wasn't. I saw a guy that had a lot of great schemes at Oregon. He had some of the best players in the country, Chip Kelly, and that offense was ahead of the whole Pac-12. And I just didn't see a whole lot of great elite arm talent. I didn't see him fitting the ball in the tight windows. I felt that he relied on his legs way too much. And he's athletic, but not Lamar Jackson or Deshaun Watson athletic, And, in Tennessee, I said, Titans fans got mad at me for whatever reason because I just think they were more Marcus Mariota fans at the time than actual Titans fans, I would say. I don't know. But either way, I got a lot of pushback for saying Mariota's not good enough. He was holding that team back. And I just want to get your thoughts on kind of how Marcus Mariota has fallen. I just saw a guy that was overrated in the first place. And, the Titans, they had very good wide receivers. They had very good running backs. the defense was always solid. The offensive line was very good, and I just saw a team that needed a quarterback, and I was kind of right because once Ryan Tannehill got in there, the team actually looked like a real football team. So, how does Mariota fit in with the Raiders this year if he were to potentially start? And do you still have hope in him?
Yeah, Mariota's biggest problem, it's almost kind of similar to Daniel Jones, where they're pretty bad at feeling pressure. Actually, it's more of a hybrid between Jones and Darnold, where he's pretty bad at feeling pressure like Jones, but then when he does feel it, he kind of melts down like Darnold. So it's really the worst of both worlds when you put it that way. Like, he's still really athletic. He's got a decent arm. I think when everything's clean, he's a pretty good decision maker, but when things break down, he's just not. And so I think he is going to remain a backup in Vegas behind Carr. I think Carr is a better player than him. Like, Carr has his issues too, and they're similar to the issues that Mariota has, but not quite as bad. In fact, not even nearly as bad, if I'm being honest. So I would probably expect Mariota to remain the backup and Carr to remain the starter. But I don't necessarily think that Marcus is going to be starting somewhere else in the near future. I think he is, like, at this point in his career, I think he is what he is, and that's a solid backup quarterback, but not somebody that I would think should be starting for 16 games.
And we're kind of talking about the Texans division. I want to get your thoughts on Phillip Rivers. Personally, I didn't think the Chargers' offensive line was very good last year, but at the same time, he had a lot of weapons. He had Keenan Allen. He had, what's his name? Mike Williams. Yeah. He had above average running backs to throw the ball to, and he just wasn't getting it done. I see a guy that, let me say this, the game is kind of past Phillip Rivers. He's not very athletic, never really was athletic, and his decision-making has become very bad over the past couple of years, not years, but last year he just was a bad decision-maker, and his accuracy is eroded, and when you're not perfect in the pocket like a Tom Brady or a Drew Brees, if you're not mobile, there's not very many spots for you. So how does Rivers fit in with the Colts offense, and should Colts fans be optimistic? Because I got to be honest with you, I would have rather signed Cam Newton or someone like that. That's just my opinion, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would have rather signed Newton too. I think they signed Rivers just because of his familiarity with the offense and familiarity with the coaching staff, but I think objectively speaking, Newton is a better quarterback at this point. In terms of decision making, really what it boils down to me is his arm is dead, and I think he's making, at least was trying to make, throws that a younger Phillip Rivers could have made, and I don't think he's fully accepted what his arm is capable of at this point, and he needs to. He needs Frank Reich to rein him in and say, look, you can't throw this deep corner route against cover 2 anymore. You don't have the juice to do it, so don't do it. And he has to adjust his playing style. He can't be young Phillip Rivers anymore because the arm just isn't there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we're going to circle back to the Texans, then we'll move into our next topic. What do the Texans need to do to get back on track? Obviously, they're in kind of a bad situation because, again, they had a lot of money in free agency, and they did not spend money in free agency. And obviously, the whole DeAndre Hopkins trade was just bad. We already talked about that. You obviously have Deshaun Watson. You have talented players. Houston can only be so bad just because they have the talent. But I got to be honest, until Bill O'Brien is gone, and until they get a real general manager in there, this team's not going to go anywhere. They're always going to disappoint, and they might make the playoffs, but they're not beating Kansas City. They're not beating the up-and-coming Ravens and the Bills. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, at this point, you could list off a lot of teams in the AFC that, in a vacuum, I would take the other team. Almost the entire AFC North, especially with Ben coming back. If Ben's arm is fine, I'm taking the entire AFC North over Houston, with the possible exception of Cincinnati. But like we talked about earlier, they have a lot of talent, so that one's a little bit more skewed towards Houston, but not by that much. In the East, I would probably take Buffalo. The other three, until we know what Jarrett Stidham is, I would probably lean Houston. But again, that's at least 4 teams now that I would very decisively take over Houston, and that's before we get to the rest of the division. I would take Tennessee over them. Indy's more of a split, and then I would take them over Jacksonville. And then in the West, I would take Kansas City over them. I'd take Denver over them. Vegas is probably about an even split. and the Chargers are about an even split. So we're talking, 6 to 8 teams that decisively I think are better than the Texans right now. So if they make it to the playoffs, and that's if, like they're not getting past the wild card round, like flat out.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I hope that the Texans get a real head coach and a real general manager because I don't want to waste Deshaun Watson. It'd be a missed opportunity if he doesn't win at least one Super Bowl in his career. That's just my opinion, though. We're going to move on to the next. You got something there?
No, I was agreeing with you. I 100%.
Yeah, no doubt. We're going to move on to the next topic. Once again, I'm joined by football analyst and content creator on YouTube, Brett Kollmann. Be sure to check him out on YouTube. B-R-E-T-T. It's B-R-E-T-T, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then K-O-L-L-M-A-N? N?
2 N's, yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
Extra German for you.
Gotcha. All right. We're going to get into team building right now. So, as far as building a Super Bowl caliber team, obviously you can go the route of building your team like Howie Roseman and the Philadelphia Eagles. They won a Super Bowl. That's successful. The Seahawks, they had a pretty good team a couple years ago that I liked. But if I'm building a Super Bowl team, I want to build my team like the Broncos and the Chiefs. I think that's the model of today's NFL, and I'll tell you why. First of all, get the quarterback right. Big arm quarterback that can move. If I have a Dwayne Haskins or if I have a big Ben Roethlisberger, someone that is not as mobile, I might invest more in the offensive line. But it would be ideal if my quarterback can move a little bit. So I take the big arm quarterback that can move, obviously. And quarterback can make up for anything. You can't whiff on you can't whiff on the quarterback. You can whiff on offensive lineman. You can whiff on a defensive lineman. Get the quarterback right. Plain and simple. Surround that quarterback with weapons is the next thing that I would do. And that's what Kansas City and Denver has done. You look at Kansas City and Denver. They're pretty much saying they're daring you to keep up with them. That's what they're doing. They're daring you to keep up with them. They surround their quarterback with multiple weapons. They can create multiple mismatches. And a lot of people say that I need to invest in the offensive line. And you're right. Up next, I want to invest. Actually, not up next. That's the fourth thing. I would invest in a defensive line next, but I'll get to that in a little bit. I think that you need to be competent on the offensive line. I think that with schemes and coaching, you can improve your offensive line dramatically. And if your quarterback gets the ball off his hands quickly and things of that nature, you can elevate your offensive line. A lot of people point to the Cowboys and say, well, the Cowboys have this great offensive line. Let's build that. Time out. They have Dak Prescott on a rookie contract. That's the only reason why they have been able to build their entire offensive lineup is because Dak Prescott's been on a cheap deal. So I would spend money on my tackles, but after that, I just want to be competent. And my whole thing is get pass rushers to protect the lead. Frank Clark, Chris Jones, Bradley Chubb, Von Miller. That's the model that I want because I got to be honest with you, Brett. I'm daring teams to keep up with me. And if I'm down, I'm never out of games. Because you look at Kansas City, down 24-0 to Houston, down in the Super Bowl, down to the Titans. They came roaring back. And when you're a run-first, defensive-oriented team, you're in a lot of 50-50 close games. I want to blow teams out. I want to score 30 and protect the lead. So that's how I would build my team. Quarterback number 1. Weapons number 2, pass rushers to protect that lead number 3, offensive line number 4, and then I would spend some money on number 1 cornerback or a safety that can move around like a Jamal Adams or a Honey Badger. So as far as teams that have won Super Bowls the last couple of years, would you go the Patriots model? Would you go the Eagles model? The Chiefs model? How are you building your roster if you're a general manager in today's NFL?
I would probably tend to favor the Eagles model where quarterback is king. Even if you have one, spending extra capital on one just to kind of protect that position as much as possible because it only takes one hit for you to be on your backup. And if your backup isn't any good, guess what? The season's over. So, spending as much capital on quarterback as possible is good. And then after that, after you feel comfortable with not just your first, but your second quarterback as well, then you really move and you hammer the offensive line, you hammer the defensive line. So if you have a good quarterback and you have good trench players, you're set. Everything else is gravy on top of that. If your quarterback is good enough, you can make do with lesser weapons as long as you still have protection. And if your offensive line is good, you'll still have a run game as well. So you can work play action, you can work RPOs, all that kind of stuff. And that can kind of compensate a little bit for inferior weapons. So really it's, get me not just one quarterback, but two quarterbacks, and get me good trench players. And then everything else after that is just pure best player available. Doesn't even matter what position. Just take the best player. Eventually, you'll fill out the roster around them. But really, if you're not good at quarterback and you're not good in the trenches, you're not going to win games.
So you would build your team like Howie Roseman?
Yeah, 100%. I think the Howie Roseman model for how he's built his team, and other than the kind of Chip Kelly years, that interlude there, the Eagles have had a lot of sustained success over the last 20 years, even going back to the Andy Reid era, which is where Howie learned a lot of how to build a team, and Andy just obviously has been in a lot of big games because his teams are always pretty darn good. But Andy was the same kind of thing where it was prioritize quarterback, and then let's prioritize trench warfare and emphasize length and power and all that kind of stuff. And Howie learned from that, and he's built his team now good over the last 20 years because of it.
Yeah, I think that Andy Reid kind of, when he was in Philadelphia, he didn't always have the wide receiver talent. I think in Kansas City, he's kind of saying, hey, give me some more weapons, Donovan McNabb didn't always have the best weapons, I would say. But yeah, I think that the Howie Roseman model is pretty good. I would still lean toward Kansas City for all the reasons I said. But yeah, I mean, it's a quarterback and coach league, How good is your quarterback? How good is your coach? And the coaches can elevate the other players. And like you said, best player available, You can take the best cornerback available. You can take the best defensive lineman available. So, yeah, I can get behind the Howie Roseman model. But, yeah, I think I'm going to lean toward the Kansas City model, I would say. Now, Brett, I want to get your take on who's the most underrated quarterback in football. I think that Matthew Stafford, personally, is the most underrated quarterback in football. I don't know if you agree with me, but I'll tell you why I think that. First of all, as far as talent, I look at Mahomes, I look at Rodgers, I look at Wilson, I look at Watson, I look at Lamar, I look at Kyler Murray. Outside of that, who's got more talent? I don't know. I mean, maybe Josh Allen. I'm just talking your talent. What's your physical God-given abilities? I'm talking arm, mobility, accuracy, just natural talent. I think Matthew Stafford is one of the 7 to 8 most talented quarterbacks in football. And I understand that he's never won the division. I get it. He's never won a playoff game. He's been to the playoffs a couple of times. So I'm not willing to put him in the top 10 because I just think you need to accomplish something. But yeah, I mean, he's had to deal with a lot of bad defenses, not great offensive lines. He's never really had a running game. I mean, in September of 2018, Kerryon Johnson rushed for 100 yards in a game. And guess what? That was the first 100-yard rusher they had since 2013. That's absurd. So you tell me, is Matthew Stafford in position to win? I don't think so. I think he's the only reason the Lions have been winning games. And I look at his touchdown to interception ratio. I'm not a big statistics guy, but there's something. He's 22nd all time as far as touchdown to interception ratio. That's better than Big Ben Roethlisberger. That's better than Cam Newton. I'm not saying that he's a better quarterback than those guys at his best, but Stafford's there, man. And I've seen the guy throw for 5,000 yards and 40 touchdowns in 2011. The guy has 28 fourth-quarter comebacks. That's 11th all time. 38 game-winning drives. That's 13th all time. So Stafford's clutch when you have the games close. So, again, Matthew Stafford's not perfect. I think that he throws too many interceptions at times. But, yeah, I mean, I think he's the most underrated quarterback in football. Do you agree with me or disagree?
I would probably say Matt Ryan, in my opinion, is the most underrated quarterback in football. He's always kind of the forgotten man. And mainly it's because I think he's not like the most athletic or not the most gifted quarterback. And there were a few years straight ever since his MVP season where the offensive line was absolutely atrocious and or injured and or both. And when Matt Ryan's under siege, he's not really mobile enough or physically gifted enough to kind of make lemonade out of lemons there. So he's very much an old school pocket passer, which has certain requirements for success, which is namely having a strong offensive line. You look at Drew Brees in New Orleans, you look at Tom Brady in New England, they always had strong offensive lines, which kind of allowed them to be their best selves, whereas Matt Ryan has not. So, but when everything kind of came together, he had Kyle Shanahan, he had a good offensive line, good weapons, but when everything kind of came together and people were able to protect him, we saw what he was capable of, which is an MVP caliber quarterback that took his team to a Super Bowl and came pretty damn close to winning that Super Bowl, were not for his defense absolutely collapsing. So I would probably say that he's the most underrated quarterback in the league because people only see him as a system quarterback. But like I talked about with Tua, I don't really mind a quarterback being a system quarterback. It just means that when you're running the right system, he's pretty damn good at it. So I think if you give him a good coach and you give him good protection, he can really do a lot of great things for you, and he doesn't get appreciated enough.
Now, here's where I'm going to disagree a little bit. I actually made a video a long time ago, and again, I might be wrong here because I'm actually going to do a film analysis video on Matt Ryan, hopefully before the season starts, because I want to really dive into his film and really dissect the issues in Atlanta. Is he kind of the reason they're losing? But man, I don't know. I don't see it with Matt Ryan. I think that he's a good quarterback, no doubt, but I think he's kind of gone from underrated to overrated. I'm sorry, man. I just don't see it. I see a guy that, he's won MVP in the past. I get that. But I just think that outside of his MVP year, I just don't see years where he's really dominated the sport. And people say that he's a little bit underrated. I think that he's a little bit overrated because he's had a lot of weapons. He's had Julio. He's had, Mohamed Sanu in the past. He's had very good wide receivers. Harry Douglas and Roddy White were pretty darn good when he was back in Atlanta the last couple years, And in the playoffs, I've seen him blow leads to Colin Kaepernick. I've seen him only score 2 points versus the Giants in the playoffs. And that's not great with a lot of weapons. So his playoff record outside of his Super Bowl year, he had 3. I think he had 1 or 2. Yeah, I don't remember how many wins he had a Super Bowl year, but outside of his Super run, he doesn't have very many playoff wins. He's a below 500 quarterback in the playoffs. So maybe I'm missing something here. What am I missing with Matt Ryan? What do you see on film? Is he as talented as some of these quarterbacks out there? What am I missing?
He's not as talented as some of the other quarterbacks out there, but keep in mind, he had the name Matty Ice for a reason, and that's because, especially early in his career, when the Falcons were down, halfway through the fourth quarter, he was going to bring them back. He was another one like Stafford, where he was having a whole lot of fourth quarter comebacks early in his career, and it's kind of fallen off the last few years, especially as his offensive line kind of shit the bed. But he had that reputation early in his career, just like Stafford did. So I think overall he is underrated. He's not as gifted as Stafford. He's not as gifted as most quarterbacks in the league these days, if we're being honest. But I still think he's efficient. I think when he's protected, he's accurate. He's a good decision maker. He's a good leader. There's a lot of quarterbacks that I would take over Matt Ryan, but there's a lot more quarterbacks that I would take Matt Ryan over them.
Yeah, and my only one other knock on Matt Ryan is that I think that the team around him dictates his success. And like you said, he's a system quarterback. You said that, and that's fine, but I just don't know, man. I think that Matt Ryan, a lot of quarterbacks need a lot of good things as far as the offensive line, the run game, the defense. The Aaron Rodgers of the world, the Deshaun Watsons of the world, even the Tom Brady's of the world, they don't grow on trees. So if you're judging Matt Ryan based on, he's reliable and things of that nature, I get that. But I don't know. I think that I think the team is dictated based on, I think that his success is dictated on how good his team is. I don't really see him elevating his team all the time. Do you disagree with me?
He doesn't elevate in the same way that Rodgers did early in his career. Mainly just because, again, he doesn't have the talent to kind of make something out of nothing, like a Mahomes, like a Lamar, like a Deshaun. So I think the standard for the quarterback position has been raised, and it's a little bit unfair to compare Ryan to that standard because he doesn't have those same gifts. But for his era, which he was kind of in the last generation of the classic pocket passer before the league kind of got taken over by mobility and athletic traits, he was in that kind of last era of a true pocket passer where it was really more sitting in there and distributing. And in that context, I think he's really good. I think it's unfair to compare him to all the young guns roaming around now just because this new generation is totally different. It's a whole different ball game now. So he will never be as good as Deshaun Watson. He will never be as good as Lamar. He will never be as good as Cam Newton, because he just doesn't have those gifts. But in the context of the era that I think he belongs to, I think he's pretty good.
Do you think Matt Ryan is a Hall of Famer?
No, I don't think so. If he won the Super Bowl, he might have an argument.
I tend to agree.
But he was never, outside of that 1 year, he was never the best quarterback in the league. Lamar Jackson has an MVP now too in his second year, and I think we still haven't even seen the best version of Lamar Jackson, and he's already been an MVP. We haven't even seen the best version of Mahomes, and he's already been an MVP. We haven't seen the best version of Watson. All these kids that are already better than Matt Ryan ever was, and we still haven't even seen their best. We've already seen Matt Ryan's best. And so if he held that level consistently year after year, then yeah, sure, he's probably a Hall of Famer, but he didn't. So I think he's Hall of very good, but not Hall of Fame.
All right, we're back. I'm once again joined by Brett Kollmann. I appreciate you for Brett for coming on the show, man. I really do. I want to dive into some questions. You've been very kind with your time, man. Obviously, you started off working for NFL Network a couple years ago. Talk about how you got, ingratiated with the NFL Network and kind of, how your time was there. What's it like?
Yeah, I loved working at NFL Network. It was, in terms of jobs where I've worked for other people, was my favorite job I ever had. Everybody in that building is amazing. I learned so much from so many people, players, coaches, producers, stuff that helped me kind of do what I do now. Everything I learned in terms of when I make the film room, everything that I learned from NFL Network. And so it was an invaluable experience for me. I started out as an intern while I was in college. 5 years later, I stuck around for a long time. They like me, I like them. So I just kind of, after I graduated, stayed on there for years and years. I worked on pretty much every show you can think of, NFL Total Access, NFL Red Zone, NFL Game Day Morning, Thursday Night Football. Like I did highlight shows. I did a little bit of everything. And I kind of had my hands in so many different areas when I was there that I learned a lot of different skills that helped me do what I do today. And so I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity that I had there before I kind of left to pursue YouTube. And, I'll still see, a lot of my old friends from the network when I go to different events. I caught up with them at the Senior Bowl that they were covering and I was covering for myself. And, yeah, it's a really special place. If anybody is in LA that works in TV and wants to get a really damn good job, go apply for NFL Network because you won't regret it.
So were you more behind the scenes? Do you actually work as an analyst there for a little bit?
No, I was purely on the production side.
Okay.
I was never on camera for them.
Okay. So kind of talk about, your interactions with the Michael Irvins of the world, some Hall of Famers, Deion Sanders is on the NFL Network. What were some of the Hall of Famers you got to actually talk football with? And what perspective as far as football do you get from those guys that you maybe don't get from, per se, just a regular analyst or even some players that are just regular players?
Those guys were really what inspired me to start kind of making this content in the first place, because I would always, talk to them on set on commercial breaks about different stuff, or, I'd kind of run into them around the halls, or they would come into edit bays and I would ask them questions when I was kind of editing highlights for them, and just kind of pick their brain at different little spots, or I'd, have lunch with them or whatever. And it was really invaluable information where I could just kind of pull up a clip and ask a question, and they would just talk and talk and talk because they all just loved the game so much. I always like to joke around that, like, Deion Sanders was who I learned press coverage technique from, because I was picking his brain after a show one day for about half hour, and I said, like, look, if you get this split, like, what's your first step? How are you using your hands? And he walked me through everything that he liked to do based on split and down and distance, and he's a brilliant tactician at the defensive back position, and I just kind of downloaded what I could from him. And I did that as much as I could for 5 years, which is where I got a lot of my knowledge from in the first place. So it was an invaluable experience for me.
So was the decision to kind of move to YouTube and be your own personal analyst, on online, kind of a tough decision? What really drove that decision?
Honestly, my wife. We didn't have kids yet. We weren't even married yet. And we didn't have a whole lot of financial commitments at the moment. So she's like, look, hey, if there was ever a time for you to take a huge risk and potentially fall on your face, it might as well be now when we don't really have anything that we're committed to. So just do it now while you can, because you'll regret it if you don't. So she pushed me to leave and kind of strike out on my own, and I did, and it worked. So I'm eternally grateful to her for that.
Talk about how long it takes to actually make an episode, the hours you put in. Because you make some of the best content out there, Brett. I really do admire your football brain and knowledge. I call you a football genius because you know your stuff. You know things about offensive linemen, defensive linemen. First of all, how did you get so ingratiated with just knowing about the positions that some people don't even care about? And talk about what goes into actually making an episode, the hours you put in. What are you looking for on film, things of that nature.
Yeah, each episode probably takes 60 to 80 hours to do. Quarterback episodes take closer to 80, and then other positions can take 50 to 60 depending on what the topic is. So it really depends on the week. There are some weeks where I really don't sleep a whole lot, so I can get it out decently on time-ish. Most of the time I don't, but I get it out when I can. In terms of kind of, where I get my knowledge from, a lot of the times it's, I'll see something and I don't really have an explanation for it, so I'll text my offensive line coach friends, or I'll text my DB friends, or, even if it's just a player on the team, I'll text them and say, hey, what were you guys doing here? And they'll give me the answer, and then I'll kind of relay that in a way that, the casual fan can kind of understand. So I almost kind of considered like the show almost like a conduit between two different worlds, which is people that know football, they play football, they coach football, and fans that don't know football and wouldn't know what they were looking at, even if they were looking at it. So I really try to frame my show in that way of translating one world to another.
And the last final question I'm going to throw at you, because you've been very kind with your time, Brad. I really do appreciate it. What would you say is something that fans that are just regular football fans just don't get as far as when they evaluate players? I kind of wanted to talk about, how statistics are overrated, how you look at quarterbacks, sometimes the interceptions aren't on the quarterback, completion percentage. I think that's a very overrated stat. Is the quarterback throwing the football away? What kind of passes are they attempting? Do they throw the ball down the field? Or are they just throwing checkdowns in garbage time? What do normal fans not get about the quarterback position or football just in general that kind of ticks you off?
I think sacks is probably the biggest thing. I think offensive linemen get blamed for sacks that aren't their fault. Sometimes it's literally just a great defensive disguise. Sometimes the quarterback runs himself into a sack. Sometimes the quarterback doesn't get rid of the ball quickly enough. There's a pretty large proportion of sacks that are not just from an offensive lineman getting whipped. It's communications issues, play calling, perfection. It can be a million different little things. And so I think when we look at the total times a quarterback is sacked, it's not entirely an indictment on the offensive line. It can be an indictment on the quarterback himself.
Got it. Man, Brett, I cannot thank you enough. This is some of the best content that I'm probably going to put out there. You were very kind with your time. I appreciate you for coming on the show, man. This was great, man. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for watching this video today. Please also note that the Juice Alert Sports Podcast is not just a YouTube channel. It is available on all podcasting platforms, including Spotify, Google Podcasts, iTunes, and Apple Podcasts. Also, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this content with all your friends. This podcast is my favorite thing in the entire world right now. It is my passion. And I want more people to listen to this podcast. I really want this podcast to grow. Also, a fun fact about me is that I want to go into the sports broadcasting and media world once I graduate from the University of Toledo, a college in Northern Ohio. I currently am a freshman there right now. I am looking to become one of the next great sports broadcasters and analysts out in the world. And I potentially would like to start my own network if this podcast really truly grows. Or if I fall short of that goal, I would love to work for a big time network like ESPN or Fox Sports 1. I am open to all networks. So if you believe in my dreams and you see or hear my passion through the screen, be sure to tell all your friends about the Juice Alert Sports Podcast. Stay motivated, you guys. Have a God bless day, and I'm out.